Millionaire CEO's fake bride faces his boardroom rivals and proves she's more than a contract. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The rain tapped softly against the glass walls of the Ward Enterprises headquarters. The city lights below flickered like restless stars, but inside, everything was silent except for the slow tick of a clock and the sound of a single pen sliding across paper. Nathan Ward, the youngest self-made millionaire in the state, stared at the contract before him. Across the desk stood Lila Brooks, a former financial analyst who had just been laid off from the same company that Nathan had recently acquired. Her hands were trembling as she held her worn leather bag close to her chest. She had come to beg for a recommendation letter, not a proposal. Nathan's voice broke the silence. "Marry me," he said evenly, his blue eyes unreadable. "Think of it as a contract. 90 days, and when it is over, you will walk away with enough money to pay every debt you have." Lila blinked, convinced she had misheard him. "Excuse me, you want me to, what?" He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "The board requires me to appear married before the annual shareholders conference next quarter. It is a ridiculous rule my late father left in the company. Bylaws marriage equals stability, credibility, trust. I need someone who can play the part, and you need help." She stared at him, stunned. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow on his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the faint exhaustion beneath his eyes. Nathan Ward, every magazine's definition of control, was asking her, a woman who could barely afford rent, to be his wife. Lila shook her head, forcing out a nervous laugh. "This is insane. You cannot just marry someone like a business deal." He slid the folder toward her. Inside was a document stamped with the company's seal. "You can, and I am offering you $100,000 for 3 months of pretending." Her breath caught. The number was almost exactly what she needed to pay her mother's hospital bills. For a moment, the room seemed to spin. Nathan's gaze softened, just a fraction. "There are 3 conditions," he said. "We do not fall in love, we respect each other's privacy, and we keep everything strictly professional." Quote. She looked at the ring he placed beside the contract, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. It gleamed under the cold office light like a silent promise. "When it is over," he added, "you will be free. No strings attached." Lila exhaled slowly. Her entire life had been one long struggle to survive, balancing bills, working double shifts, skipping meals so her mother could afford medication. And now this man was offering her a way out, a way to breathe again. But could she really sell part of her dignity for safety? Her voice trembled. "Why me? You could hire an actress, someone who knows how to live in your world." Nathan's lips curved into something almost like a smile. "Because actresses lie for a living. I need someone real." The clock ticked again, echoing between them. Lila looked down at the pen in her hand. Every instinct screamed to walk away, but the memory of her mother's weak smile in the hospital bed whispered otherwise. She signed. Nathan nodded once, businesslike, but his eyes held an unreadable flicker as if he, too, was wondering what line they had just crossed. "Welcome to the contract," he said quietly. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, and somewhere deep inside her, Lila felt the first tremor of something she could not name, something that had nothing to do with business at all. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of Ward Enterprises. The world outside looked bright, but inside, Lila's stomach was a knot of nerves. She had barely slept. The contract she signed the night before lay folded in her purse, its edges already worn from how tightly she had held it. Nathan had sent a message at 6 a.m. "Be ready by 9. We have a meeting." Now, standing in the marble lobby, Lila smoothed the wrinkles in her plain gray skirt and wished her heartbeat would slow down. Every person who passed by seemed to look at her too long. She felt like an imposter in someone else's story. When the elevator doors opened, Nathan was already waiting on the top floor, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. The skyline stretched behind him like a painted backdrop. "Morning, Mrs. Ward," he said evenly. Her cheeks warmed. "You do not have to call me that." "I do. The staff listens." The way he said it, calm, almost detached, reminded her that this was still business, nothing more. He handed her a thin folder. "Today we start with the essentials. Public image. You will need to attend 3 events before the shareholder conference: a gala dinner, a charity luncheon, and 1 interview. You will have a full-time stylist to help you prepare." She blinked. "A stylist? That seems a bit much." He looked up from his tablet. "If you are going to stand beside me in front of a room full of investors, appearances matter. You will learn quickly that perception builds trust." Quote. Lila nodded, trying not to sound defensive. "I suppose so." His tone softened slightly. "Do not worry. I will not let them eat you alive." It was the first almost kind thing he had said since the deal began. That afternoon, she met her assigned stylist, a brisk woman named Claire who spoke with the confidence of someone who managed entire wardrobes for politicians. Within an hour, Lila was standing in front of a mirror, surrounded by fabrics and color palettes. "Corporate elegance, not romantic," Claire said, adjusting a blazer on Lila's shoulders. "You are his partner, not his ornament." Lila met her own reflection and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked polished, calm, and ready to belong to a world that had once laughed at her thrift store shoes. Later that evening, Nathan arrived to review the results. He stood at the doorway, silent for a moment, studying her. The silence stretched until he finally said, "Good. You look like someone the board will respect." She smiled, a little unsure. "That is what this is about, right? Respect." He nodded once. "Exactly." But something flickered in his eyes, something that suggested he saw more than just a contract in front of him. The next few days became a blur of preparation. Nathan briefed her on company details, names of board members, and public talking points. They rehearsed how to stand together, how to answer casual questions without revealing too much. One afternoon, while reviewing notes in his office, Lila asked quietly, "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" Nathan looked up, surprised. "Pretending?" "Yes. Acting like everything is perfect. Like you are not human under all that control." He leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "It comes with the job. People do not want honesty from a CEO. They want certainty, even when it is a lie." Lila watched him carefully. "Maybe they would trust you more if you let them see the real person once in a while." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, and maybe they would not. Their eyes held for a moment longer than they should have, until his phone rang and shattered the silence. He turned away to take the call, and just like that, the wall between them went up again. By the end of the week, the gala invitations arrived. Gold-embossed envelopes, heavy with importance. Nathan handed her one personally. "Saturday night, downtown Grand Hall. You will meet the board for the first time. They will test you, so stay calm, speak less, and smile only when you mean it." She laughed softly. "Smile only when I mean it? That might take some practice." Nathan's eyes met hers, and for the first time, his expression softened into something close to admiration. "You will do fine, Lila. You are tougher than you think." Quote. As she walked out of his office, the city lights flickered on one by one outside the tall windows. Somewhere between fear and excitement, Lila realized that this fake marriage was already teaching her something she had never expected: how to stand tall in a world that had always tried to make her small. And though she did not know it yet, the night of the gala would test far more than her posture or her smile. It would test her heart. The night of the gala arrived with a kind of tension that made the air itself feel electric. The grand hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers, filled with laughter, champagne, and people who had never known what it meant to worry about rent or hospital bills. Cameras flashed near the red carpet entrance, where every guest was announced by name. When the double doors opened, Nathan Ward walked in first, his presence commanding quiet respect. Lila followed a step behind, wearing a midnight blue gown that Claire had chosen for her. The fabric glimmered softly under the lights, and though her pulse raced, her face held a calm confidence she did not entirely feel. A murmur ran through the crowd as whispers started. "That is his wife? When did he get married?" The board members turned, curious. Nathan's hand rested gently at her back, a gesture that felt steadying but impersonal. "Remember," he whispered just above the music. "Head high, eyes forward. You belong here." They moved through the hall together, shaking hands, exchanging polite greetings. Every smile Lila offered was measured, every answer rehearsed. She could feel eyes following her every move, waiting for her to falter. Then, near the center of the ballroom, a man with a sharp grin and a louder voice approached them. "Nathan Ward," he said. "I was wondering when you would introduce us to your mysterious bride." His tone dripped with challenge. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Lila, this is Victor Hale, one of our competing shareholders." Victor's smile widened. "Competing? Come now, Nathan. You make it sound like a war." He turned to Lila, extending a glass of champagne. So tell me, Mrs. Ward, what is it like to be married to the most controlled man in the city? Lila felt the sting of mockery beneath the charm. For a moment, her mind went blank. She remembered Nathan's warning. Speak less, smile only when you mean it. So she smiled just a little and said, "It is like working with gravity. You do not always see it, but it keeps everything from falling apart." The group around them laughed softly, impressed by her quick wit. Nathan's eyes flicked toward her, surprised, maybe even proud. Victor, however, was not done. "Clever," he said, his tone sharpening. "But tell me, did you two meet before or after the merger? People are wondering how business and pleasure mix so easily for you." The question hung heavy in the air. Lila could feel the weight of a dozen curious stares. Her palms grew warm, but she kept her voice steady. "We met when our goals aligned," she said calmly. "He was looking for someone who understood loyalty. I was looking for someone who still believed in it." The answer silenced Victor. Even Nathan looked momentarily taken aback. The nearby photographers caught the moment the poised woman beside the guarded CEO. Later, when the speeches began, Lila stood quietly at the edge of the stage as Nathan addressed the crowd about company growth and upcoming projects. His words were smooth, rehearsed, almost mechanical. But then a journalist interrupted with a question that sliced through the polite atmosphere. "Mr. Ward," she asked, "some say your recent marriage was a move to stabilize your public image before the board election. How do you respond to claims that this relationship is not genuine?" The ballroom went still. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Lila stepped forward. "May I answer that?" she said. Her voice carried across the room. "This marriage may have begun as an arrangement, but everything about tonight is real. The people who work for this company, the families who depend on it, the causes it funds. If believing in stability and partnership makes us less genuine, then perhaps we should all fake a little more faith." A ripple of applause followed, growing louder until even the skeptical faces began to soften. Nathan turned toward her, astonishment flickering in his expression. When the evening finally ended, they stepped outside into the cool night air. The sound of traffic hummed softly in the distance. "You did not have to say that," Nathan said, his voice quiet. Lila looked at him, her breath visible in the cold. "Maybe I did. Maybe someone needed to remind them that hearts are not part of the contract." For a long moment, Nathan said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. "You were extraordinary tonight. Go." She exhaled, a small laugh escaping her lips. "For a fake wife, that is not bad." He looked at her with something gentler than professionalism. "No, Lila, not bad at all." As their car pulled away from the glowing hall, the city stretched around them brilliant, restless, and filled with possibilities neither of them had planned for. Somewhere deep inside, Lila realized that this partnership built on paper was beginning to feel dangerously close to something real. The days after the gala passed like a storm settling into calm. The newspapers called it a triumph. "Ward's wife wins the room," one headline read. Lila tried not to let it go to her head, but she could not deny the strange new confidence she felt walking through the marble halls of the company. People greeted her with respect now, not the sideways glances they had given before. Nathan had been quieter since that night. He came to meetings on time, spoke to her with a softer tone, and sometimes lingered in conversation a few seconds longer than necessary. Their arrangement still had clear boundaries, but something about the way he looked at her had changed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Nathan called her into his office. The city lights outside glowed like amber reflections on the glass. He was sitting behind his desk, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, still powerful, but somehow more human. "You handled yourself incredibly well at the gala," he said. The board was impressed. Even Victor backed off for once. Lila smiled faintly. "I was just trying not to ruin your reputation." He leaned back, studying her. "You did more than that. You reminded them that authenticity still matters." Silence lingered between them. It was not awkward, just full. Then Nathan broke it with an unexpected question. "Do you ever regret signing that contract?" Lila hesitated. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not because of you, but because it makes me question what people really value. Stability, partnership, or love. Maybe they all blur together when money gets involved." Nathan nodded slowly. "That is the curse of my world. Everything becomes a transaction, even trust." For the first time, she heard something vulnerable in his voice. She looked at him closely, realizing there were dark circles under his eyes she had never noticed before. "You do not have to carry it all alone," she said quietly. He gave a small laugh, almost bitter. That is easy to say when you are not the one expected to be perfect every day. Maybe, she replied softly, but perfection is lonely. No one truly connects with someone who never makes mistakes. Nathan's gaze met hers, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The distance between their lives suddenly felt smaller than it had ever been. The following week brought another public appearance, this time a charity auction hosted by the Ward Foundation. The event was smaller than the gala, but the crowd was more intimate, full of donors and journalists looking for a new story. Lila wore a simple cream dress and carried herself with the quiet grace that had begun to define her. Nathan stayed close, his hand occasionally brushing hers as they greeted guests. Every touch, however accidental, seemed to echo longer than it should have. During the auction, a painting titled The Weight of Silence was presented, an abstract piece of cool grays and stormy blues. The artist described it as a reflection of isolation and control. Nathan bid on it without hesitation, outbidding everyone in the room. When he won, he turned and whispered to her, "It feels like my life before you walked in." Lila looked up at him, caught off guard by the honesty. "And after?" she asked quietly. He paused, eyes softening, still figuring that part out. Later, when the crowd thinned, they found themselves alone on the balcony overlooking the river. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. The city lights shimmered across the water like scattered stars. Nathan rested his hands on the railing. "You have changed the way people see me," he said, "and maybe the way I see myself." Lila smiled. "That sounds like a lot of pressure for a fake wife." He turned toward her, his voice lower now. "Maybe there is nothing fake about what you bring into a room." The words hung in the air, warm and uncertain. Lila felt her heart quicken, but before she could respond, someone called Nathan's name from inside. The spell broke. As they re-entered the ballroom, Victor Hale stood near the bar, speaking with a group of board members. His smirk returned the moment he saw them. Something in his eyes warned that their fragile balance was about to be tested again. That night, as Lila rode home in the company car, she stared out at the rain-streaked window. For all the glamour and applause, she could not shake one truth: every moment that felt real between her and Nathan was still bound by ink and signatures. And deep down, she feared that when the contract ended, so would everything else that had begun to feel like hope. A week later, the calm that followed the charity event began to crumble. Rumors started spreading online, small at first questions about the legitimacy of Nathan's marriage, whispers that their union was nothing more than a corporate showpiece. Lila saw the headlines as she walked past the receptionist's desk one morning. "Ward's fairy tale wife too perfect to be real." Her stomach twisted. She hurried to Nathan's office, but he was already reading the same article on his tablet. His expression was unreadable, the calm mask he wore when the world was watching. "I guess the storm has arrived," he said without looking up. "Did Victor do this?" she asked. Nathan nodded slowly. "He is behind most of the leaks lately. He wants the board to believe I staged the marriage to manipulate public trust." "What?" Lila felt a wave of guilt. "This is my fault. I should have known my presence would make things worse." He looked up sharply. "Do not ever say that. You handled yourself better than anyone could have. This is not about you. It is about control, and Victor hates that he cannot control me." Before she could respond, the door opened and Nathan's assistant stepped in. "Sir, the board has requested an emergency meeting. They want both of you there." Quote. The meeting took place that afternoon in the glass conference room overlooking the skyline. Every seat around the long table was filled. Lila sat beside Nathan, her palms pressed together under the table to keep them from shaking. One of the senior board members spoke first. "Mr. Ward, these rumors have placed the company's credibility at risk. We need assurance that your marriage is legitimate. Transparency is no longer optional." Nathan kept his tone level. "You have my assurance that nothing about my personal life jeopardizes this company." Victor leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Then you would not mind providing proof. Perhaps your marriage certificate, photographs, or interviews together. Unless, of course, that contract of yours is more fragile than we think." The room fell silent. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. Nathan's hand tightened on the table. "You are out of line," he said quietly, but the damage was already done. After the meeting, the hallway outside buzzed with tension. Nathan stopped and turned to her. "You do not need to attend tomorrow's press briefing. I will handle it." She shook her head. "No, I will stand beside you. We started this together." His eyes softened for the first time that day. "You do not owe me that." "Maybe not," she said, "but I owe it to the truth." The next morning, the press room was packed. Cameras lined the front row, microphones aimed at the podium. Nathan spoke first, addressing the company's integrity and dismissing the allegations. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped aside and gestured toward Lila. "She would like to say something," he announced. Lila's heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "People may doubt what they see between us," she said, looking directly into the lenses pointed her way. "But no contract can make someone care when no one is watching. What we share began as an agreement. Yes, but the respect we have built is something that no rumor can destroy," the crowd murmured. For a brief moment, silence held the room. When they left the stage, Nathan turned to her, his voice low. "You just gave them what they needed." She smiled faintly. "I was just honest." He looked at her, something like admiration in his eyes. "You always are." Outside, flashes from the cameras faded behind them. Neither of them said what they were both beginning to realize, that somewhere between duty and defense, the line between contract and connection had already disappeared. That night, the rain returned to the city. Lila watched it fall from the window of her apartment, the streetlights turning each drop into a trail of gold. She should have felt relieved the press conference had gone better than anyone expected, but her heart was heavy. The truth she had spoken on stage had not been scripted, and that scared her more than any camera ever could. Her phone buzzed. A message from Nathan appeared on the screen. "Come to the office. I need to show you something." When she arrived, the building was almost empty. The lights on the top floor were still on, spilling a soft glow through the glass walls of his office. Nathan stood by the window, jacket off, tie undone, looking out at the city. On his desk lay a folder thick with documents. "You looked incredible today," he said quietly as she stepped inside. "You made them believe in something I almost forgot existed." Lila smiled, uncertain. "And what is that?" "Faith," he said simply. "Faith that not everything has to be calculated." He opened the folder and slid a paper toward her. "This is what Victor has been after all along. The Foundation's endowment fund, $50 million meant for community projects. He wants to reclassify it as company profit. If the board votes his way next week, that money will vanish into private accounts." Lila frowned, scanning the document. "So the marriage was not just about image, it was to protect the foundation." Nathan nodded. "It was my mother's legacy. She believed success meant nothing if it did not lift others. The only way to secure the fund was to appear stable before the vote. The bylaws required a married CEO. Quote, everything clicked into place, the urgency, the secrecy, the contract. Lila felt a mixture of anger and understanding. "You should have told me," she said softly. He met her gaze. "I wanted to, but I thought it would make it harder for you to walk away when this ends." Silence filled the room, thick and fragile. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline. Lila took a step closer. "Nathan, I am already in too deep to walk away." He looked at her then, really looked, no masks, no distance. For the first time, his voice trembled slightly. "You are not supposed to make this real." She smiled sadly. Maybe neither of us had a choice. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain against the glass, steady and relentless. Nathan reached out as if to touch her hand, but stopped halfway, his fingers curling into his palm. Finally, he said, "Whatever happens next, I will not let Victor win. The foundation stays untouched. That is my promise." "Good." Lila nodded, her heart pounding. "Then we face him together." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Lila, thank you." She paused at the door, meeting his eyes. "You are welcome, Mr. Ward. But remember, faith goes both ways." The door closed softly behind her, leaving Nathan alone with the storm and a realization he could no longer deny what had started, as a deal had become something worth fighting for. The following morning, the headlines exploded. Victor Hale had leaked confidential documents to the press, claiming they proved Nathan Ward's marriage was fabricated to secure a personal vote advantage. Photos from private company events were splashed across every business site. Nathan and Lila together, smiling for cameras, standing too close, their story twisted into something scandalous. Lila's phone rang nonstop, but she ignored it. By the time she reached the office, reporters had gathered outside the building. Flashbulbs burst like tiny lightning strikes as she hurried through the doors. Inside, security guards whispered. Employees pretended not to stare. The calm professionalism she had built over weeks was gone in an instant. Nathan was already in the conference room with the board when she entered. His expression was tight, his usual confidence strained. Victor sat across the table, the faint smirk on his face barely hidden. One of the board members spoke sharply. "Mr. Ward, this is a serious breach of ethics. If what Mr. Hale claims is true, you could be removed from your position immediately. Victor folded his hands, feigning concern. No one wants that, but the company deserves honesty. If the marriage is fake, it calls everything else into question. Nathan stood. His voice was calm but edged with steel. What calls this company into question is greed disguised as integrity. Victor leaked internal files and twisted them to frame a lie. My private life is not a performance for your approval. He looked directly at Victor. You have been trying to dismantle my mother's foundation from the moment she passed. This was never about me. It was about profit. The room erupted with whispers. Victor rose, pretending to be offended. Those are bold accusations. Can you prove that? Before Nathan could respond, Lila stepped forward. Yes, we can. She set a folder on the table. These are emails Victor sent to outside investors proposing to redirect the foundation's funds in exchange for shares. They were sent from his private account, but he forgot to delete the backup stored on the internal server. The board fell silent. One member took the folder, scanning quickly. Murmurs spread around the table as the truth settled in. Victor's composure cracked. You cannot possibly, Nathan cut him off. Security has already verified the timestamps. You will receive a visit from our legal department by the end of the day. The chairman of the board leaned forward. Mr. Hale, you are suspended effective immediately pending investigation. Victor's face turned pale. He gathered his things and left without another word. When the door closed, the room seemed to exhale. Nathan turned to Lila, his voice quiet. You did not have to do that. She met his eyes. Yes, I did. Because some things are worth defending, even if they started as pretend. The chairman nodded approvingly. Mr. Ward, the board stands with you. The foundation remains under your protection. Nathan thanked them, but his gaze stayed on Lila. The tension between them had changed, no longer restrained by duty, but charged with something deeper. As they walked out of the conference room, he whispered, You just saved everything my mother built. Lila smiled faintly. No, Nathan, you did. I just reminded you why it mattered. For the first time in weeks, he reached for her hand, and this time, he did not stop halfway. The following days moved quietly but heavily, as if the whole city was holding its breath. Victor's suspension became official, and the news cycle shifted from scandal to admiration. Headlines now read, Ward Foundation saved from corporate takeover, and the CEO who chose integrity over power. Nathan's reputation, once hanging by a thread, was suddenly stronger than ever. But inside, he felt something else rising, something that had nothing to do with business. Lila continued her duties as if nothing had changed, but her presence filled every corner of the office. She greeted people with the same calm warmth she had always shown, but Nathan noticed the exhaustion behind her smile. Every time she looked away, he caught the faint shadow of distance, the reminder that their agreement had an end date. Late one evening, after most of the staff had left, Nathan walked into the lounge area where Lila was packing up reports. The golden light from the city cast a quiet glow across the room. It is over, he said gently. Victor will face charges, and the foundation is safe. Lila looked up. I am glad, she said softly. Your mother would be proud. He hesitated. You helped me more than you know, and now that the contract has served its purpose, he paused, struggling to find the right words. I need to ask what you want to do. She closed the folder in her hands. The deal was for 90 days, Nathan. The vote is finished. You do not owe me anything. He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. That is not what I asked. I am not talking about obligation. I am talking about choice. Lila's heartbeat quickened. She met his gaze, unsure of what to say. If we were not bound by that paper, she whispered, would you still have chosen me? Nathan took a deep breath. Yes, but I was afraid to admit it because this started as a lie. Lila smiled sadly. Maybe it started as one, but lies do not create trust, Nathan. Actions do. And you proved yourself long before I did. He shook his head. You were the one who made me remember what truth feels like. Quote. Silence filled the room again, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring she had worn during their staged wedding. He set it gently on the table between them. This was supposed to be a prop, he said, a symbol of something false, but it never felt that way to me. Lila stared at the ring, the faint light reflecting off its surface. The contract ends tomorrow, she murmured. Nathan's voice lowered. Then let us rewrite it not with lawyers, but with honesty. Her eyes softened, shimmering with tears she tried to hide. You do not have to do this. I want to, he said simply. No signatures, no terms, just the truth. For the first time, she let herself believe that what had begun as a transaction might become something real. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city lights flickered like a promise that tomorrow could finally belong to them. 1 month later, spring sunlight warmed the glass walls of the Ward Foundation headquarters. The storm that had once threatened to destroy everything had long passed, leaving behind something quiet, steady, and real. Lila stood in the new community wing of the foundation building, surrounded by volunteers and children painting bright murals on the walls. Her smile was easy now, unforced, touched by the peace of someone who finally belonged where she was. Nathan approached from behind, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked different, too, more relaxed, the weight that had lived in his eyes replaced by warmth. "The board just approved the expansion project," he said, handing her a cup. "The foundation will open 3 new centers by summer." Lila accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his. "That is incredible! Your mother's dream is really happening." "Our dream," he corrected softly. "None of this would exist without you." "Great." They walked together through the hallway lined with photos of the foundation's outreach programs. One frame caught Lila's attention, the photo from the gala months ago. She laughed quietly. "I still cannot believe that night changed everything." Nathan smiled. "You changed everything. That was the moment I realized you were never part of the act." She looked at him, teasing gently. "Are you sure this is not still part of the contract?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, sealed with the company crest. "That depends. I have one last document for you to sign." Lila unfolded the paper, expecting more paperwork, but instead found a handwritten note. It read, "This is not a contract, it is a promise. Stay, if you choose, not because you have to, but because you want to." Look. When she looked up, Nathan was kneeling slightly, holding the same ring that once symbolized a lie. Now, it gleamed under the sunlight, simple and sincere. "I do not want this to be a performance," he said. "I want it to be a beginning." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Are you sure you can live without rules and conditions?" He smiled. "Only if you promise to break them with me." The laughter that followed was soft and real. Around them, the sound of brushes against walls, and the chatter of volunteers carried through the hall like music. Lila took his hand, and together they stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the river. The city stretched before them, alive, forgiving, and full of second chances. For the first time, their story was not about power, or contracts, or saving face. It was about 2 people who had learned that love is not written in ink but proven in action. As the camera of the world turned away from them at last, Nathan and Lila simply stood side by side, no longer pretending, no longer afraid. Their deal had ended, but what began in its place was everything they had both been searching for all along, a love that asked for nothing and promised everything.